That single idea was at the heart of Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophy. He believed that the majority sleepwalk through existence, carrying beliefs they didn't choose, following paths they didn't carve, living scripts they never wrote. And he devoted his life to shattering those illusions. Not gently, not politely, but like a hammer breaking idols. Nietzsche didn't offer comforting answers, he offered uncomfortable mirrors. He forced humanity to look at itself stripped of its masks, its borrowed faiths, its inherited morals. He walked straight into the collapse of old certainties, religion fading, tradition unraveling, meaning slipping through the fingers of an entire civilization. And instead of retreating, he asked the most dangerous question of all. If everything you've relied on disappeared, who would you become? We live in a time that would have fascinated him. A time of endless distraction, constant opinions, shallow noise dressed as truth. A time when people drown in information but starve for meaning. A time when comfort has become a religion, and discomfort is treated like an error in the system. Nietzsche saw this coming. He saw that when external structures crumble, individuals either awaken or dissolve. He wrote not for the masses, but for the few willing to wrestle with themselves. I want, he once said, to bring forth a generation of men and women who will stand on their own. His ideas were never meant to be tucked into textbooks, they were meant to be lived. They are dangerous because they demand transformation. Imagine a man walking alone through a forest while everyone else sleeps in the safety of their villages. The path is unclear, the air cold, the darkness thick. Most would turn back. Nietzsche's lesson was to keep walking, to become the kind of person who doesn't need the village to tell them where to go. More than a century later, his words haven't faded. If anything, they've grown louder. Because the challenges he wrote about have intensified. We've built higher towers of comfort, louder machines of distraction, stronger walls of borrowed beliefs. And still, somewhere deep inside, many feel what he felt. That life lived on autopilot is not life at all. What you're about to hear are not tips or steps. They are 7 living ideas that Nietzsche forged through pain, brilliance, and relentless honesty. Ideas that, if taken seriously, can shake the foundations of how you see the world. They are as relevant now as they were in his time, perhaps even more so. And if you stay with me until the end, you'll understand why Nietzsche believed that the greatest act a human can commit is not to follow, but to create, to stand where nothing is certain and build something real. So let's step into the forest with him. Let's walk where few are willing to. Nietzsche believed that every human being stands at a crossroads between what they are told to be and what they could become. Most choose the first path. It's easier. It's lined with applause, reassurance, and ready-made meaning. But the second path, the one that leads to becoming who you truly are, is narrow, uncertain, and terrifyingly quiet. That's where his first and most radical lesson lives. Become who you are. He didn't mean be yourself in the modern casual sense. He meant something far more demanding. To become who you are, you must first destroy what you are not. You must examine every inherited belief, every borrowed opinion, every reflexive loyalty, and ask, is this mine, or was it handed to me by a world that fears individuality? Most people never ask. They confuse comfort for truth. But Nietzsche wanted to awaken those willing to endure the pain of carving their own shape out of the raw stone of existence. Look around. How many choices in your life were truly yours? How many of your convictions were born from deep reflection, not convenience or imitation? Nietzsche would say that until you face these questions honestly, you are not living. You are being lived through. This journey of becoming is not a one-time revelation. It is a lifelong act of courage. And courage, for Nietzsche, wasn't about bravado. It was about standing alone. He once wrote, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. If you try it, you will be lonely often and sometimes frightened. But no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. That loneliness is not a mistake. It's a sign you're walking the real path. In an age of conformity, where algorithms tell us what to think and social currents decide what is acceptable, choosing to be authentically yourself is a revolutionary act." Nietzsche's words hit harder now than ever. From this foundation rises another lesson. Do not run from suffering, transform it. Nietzsche rejected the idea that suffering is merely something to avoid. He saw it as the raw material of greatness. In his view, a life without struggle is a flat, colorless existence. Growth happens in the furnace, not in the garden. Modern culture promises endless comfort, softer beds, faster entertainment, smoother distractions. But Nietzsche would have warned us, every comfort you cling to too tightly dulls your edge. He wrote, "What does not kill me makes me stronger," not as a motivational slogan, but as a brutal statement of reality. Strength is not given, it is forged in hardship. Think about the people you most respect, not the ones who had it easy, but those who stood in the fire and refused to let it consume them. Think about your own life. The moments that shaped you most were rarely the comfortable ones. They were the trials that cracked you open, forcing you to become more than you were. Nietzsche believed those moments are not curses, they are invitations. But here's the paradox he understood. Most flee from their suffering not because it's unbearable, but because it threatens the stories they've built about themselves. Pain shatters illusions. And if your life is built on borrowed illusions, that shattering feels like death. But if you dare to stay with it, to face the storm instead of hiding, you begin to transform it into power. This leads to a third, equally piercing lesson. Question every morality that demands your obedience. Nietzsche lived in a world where traditional religion and moral systems were losing their grip. He saw people continuing to follow rules out of habit, long after they'd stopped believing in the reasons behind them. He called this the shadow of God, the moral frameworks that linger even after their foundations have vanished. He asked, who wrote the rules you live by? Do they serve your flourishing, or do they chain you to someone else's vision of virtue? Nietzsche wasn't telling you to become immoral. He was telling you to become the author of your own moral code, to look at the commandments handed down to you and have the courage to rewrite them if they no longer lead to truth. This is terrifying, because when you question inherited morality, you step into a void. You no longer have a ready-made script. But Nietzsche saw this void not as despair, but as freedom. In that emptiness, you can create something authentic, something real. Look at modern life. So much of our behavior is driven by unexamined shoulds. You should want this career. You should live this way. You should believe these things. Nietzsche would say, stop. Stop and ask, why? If the answer is because that's what people do, it's time to burn that script and write your own. As you start to question inherited morality, as you turn suffering into strength, as you strip away borrowed identities, something extraordinary happens. You stop being a reflection and start becoming a force. And that shift doesn't go unnoticed. The world responds to those who live from their center differently. They don't blend in, they shape the atmosphere around them. But Nietzsche also warned, this path is not for the faint of heart. The more you become yourself, the more resistance you will face, from society, from others, even from parts of your own psyche that fear change. That's why these lessons endure. They are not ideas you casually agree with, they are truths you wrestle with for a lifetime. Have you ever caught yourself living a life that felt too small, too scripted, as if you were performing a role you never auditioned for? Nietzsche's voice cuts through that fog. Break the role. Rewrite the play. Become the author. Nietzsche often wrote about solitude, not as isolation, but as a crucible. He believed that to create anything of real value, your character, your art, your destiny, you must be willing to step away from the chorus of collective voices. The great man, he said, is necessarily a solitary one. Not because he rejects humanity, but because he refuses to drown in it. In solitude, illusions begin to dissolve. When the noise fades, you can finally hear the quieter, truer voices within, the ones drowned out by constant comparison and external approval. Nietzsche knew that the modern world, with its relentless connectivity, would make this even harder. How many of us can sit in silence without reaching for a distraction? How many can bear to face themselves without the shield of busyness? This solitude is not easy. It strips away the flattering mirrors of other people's opinions. But that's precisely why it matters. Without solitude, you cannot truly create your own values. You merely recycle the world's noise. Nietzsche believed that to live authentically, you must have the courage to stand apart long enough to become someone worth returning to. And this brings us to one of his most misunderstood but profound ideas, the Übermensch, often translated as the overman or the one who transcends. Nietzsche didn't mean a superhuman in the physical sense. He meant someone who has transcended herd morality, who has faced suffering and turned it into strength, who has stood in solitude and created values that reflect their deepest truth. This figure is not given to us. It is something we must become. In a world where mediocrity is normalized and conformity is rewarded, Nietzsche's challenge still stands like a sword in the stone. Will you live as a passive inheritor, or will you become a creator? The Übermensch is not about superiority over others. It's about mastery over yourself. It's about becoming so deeply rooted in your own being that you are no longer swayed by every passing breeze of opinion. It's about living with such intensity and honesty that your very existence becomes a kind of rebellion against the shallow. Nietzsche once wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." This is perhaps his most timeless insight. When you discover a purpose so deeply your own that it animates you from the inside, no external hardship can crush you. Meaning, for Nietzsche, is not found lying in wait. It is created through the act of living deliberately. And that, perhaps, is the ultimate thread running through all his lessons. He didn't want followers. He wanted creators. He didn't want you to accept his philosophy blindly. He wanted to provoke you into building your own. He was less a preacher than a blacksmith, hammering away at the brittle chains of inherited belief so that others might forge their own armor. As you let these lessons settle, ask yourself, where in your life have you inherited instead of created? Where have you sought comfort over truth, applause over authenticity, certainty over depth? And what might happen if, just for once, you choose the harder path, the Nietzschean path, of facing the storm, standing alone, and forging something original out of the chaos? If these ideas strike something in you, if they awaken that quiet hunger for something more real, then stay with this journey. There are many more thinkers, more truths, more mirrors that don't flatter but challenge. And if you want to keep walking this path with me, you already know what to do, not because you're told, but because you choose to. Nietzsche believed that the greatest act is to affirm life, not as it should be, but as it is, and to rise within it, creating meaning where none is given. That is the thread that ties his 7 lessons together. They are not meant to decorate your mind, they are meant to ignite it. So here's the question that lingers as the forest grows quiet again. When the borrowed certainties fade, when no external script remains, will you have the courage to become who you are?